It was a warm summer evening in July when Michael and Aisha pulled into the gravel driveway of the bed and breakfast they had booked for their weekend getaway. The couple had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. Michael, a teacher, and Aisha, an attorney, had both been working long hours and needed a break from the hustle of city life. They had read rave reviews about this quaint little place on the outskirts of a small town in upstate New York. Pictures online showed a beautiful house with a cozy porch, neatly manicured gardens, and rooms that promised comfort. But something felt off as they approached the front door. Michael knocked confidently, his hands solid against the wooden door. They waited. Aisha glanced around, noticing the curtains in the windows shift slightly, as if someone inside had quickly peeked out. But no one came to greet them. Michael knocked again, louder this time. Silence. They exchanged uneasy glances. Maybe they're busy? We did arrive a little earlier than check-in time, Aisha suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Michael nodded but felt the sting of the situation building in his chest. They stood there for another 5 minutes before Michael tried the doorbell. Still nothing. The oppressive quiet began to settle heavily in the air between them, and the joyful anticipation they had felt during the drive began to sour. Just as Michael was about to walk around the side of the house, the door cracked open. A middle-aged white woman stood there, peering out through the small gap as though unwilling to fully reveal herself. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice sharp and curt, as if their presence was an inconvenience. She did not smile. Michael stepped forward, giving her their names. "We have a reservation for the weekend. The confirmation said check-in was between 3 and 6, and we're right on time." The woman's eyes flickered between Michael and Aisha, her gaze lingering a little too long on their dark skin. Something shifted in her expression. Discomfort, maybe even disdain. It was fleeting but unmistakable. Aisha felt it too, her fingers subtly tightening around the handle of her suitcase. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice colder now. "We're fully booked. Must have been a mistake with the system. We don't have any rooms available." Michael and Aisha exchanged confused glances. Michael pulled out his phone, showing her the email confirmation. "No, we booked weeks ago. It's all here." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. She barely glanced at the phone. "Like I said, we're full." Michael's face tightened, but he kept his tone calm. "We've traveled a long way. Surely there's something that can be done." "I'm afraid not," she replied, stepping back as if to close the door. "You'll have to find somewhere else. Sorry." The door shut with a finality that left Michael and Aisha standing on the porch in stunned silence. For a long moment, neither spoke. The warm breeze felt suddenly colder as the reality of the situation sank in. Rejected. Turned away without explanation other than a vague, "we're full," despite having booked in advance. Aisha was the first to break the silence, her voice tinged with disbelief and hurt. "Do you think—" Michael exhaled, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Yeah, I think we know exactly why." The drive back into town was quiet. Aisha stared out the window, watching the trees and open fields blur by, her mind racing. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to them, but every time it cut just as deep. It didn't matter how successful they were, how well-spoken, how educated. To some people, none of that mattered because their skin color came first. When they pulled into a gas station on the edge of the town, Michael sat silently for a moment before finally speaking. "We should report this. Leave a review. Warn others." Aisha sighed. "And then what?" "We've been through this before. These places don't care. They'll just deny it. It's their word against ours." She knew the pattern all too well. The excuses, the justifications. "It's a misunderstanding," they'd say. It wasn't because of race, but the underlying truth was always there, like a wound that never fully healed. Still, the rejection gnawed at them. Michael had always been the more optimistic of the two, but even he was struggling to shake off the bitter taste this time. They could feel it. This wasn't a coincidence. The way the woman had looked at them, the door that had stayed closed for just a little too long. It wasn't just about overbooking. "Let's just find another place to stay," Michael said eventually, trying to move on, though the hurt lingered in his voice. "We're not letting this ruin our weekend." They drove through the town, a place that seemed untouched by time, its streets lined with small, locally owned businesses and a few bed and breakfasts. They found another inn, run by an older couple who welcomed them warmly and without hesitation. It was a stark contrast to what they had just experienced, but even as they settled into their room, the earlier incident hung over them like a dark cloud. Aisha lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the countless times they had been made to feel less than, small, invisible, unwelcome. She thought about the pain of being judged for something so superficial, so beyond their control. But something else stirred within her too, a quiet, simmering resolve. "We can't just let this go," she whispered to herself in the dark, her mind already turning over what they could do next. Not this time. The door had been slammed in their faces, but the story wasn't over. Not yet. The sun rose slowly over the small town, casting golden hues across the sleepy streets. Birds chirped, and the town seemed to come alive with the sound of morning routines, shopkeepers opening their stores, people greeting each other on their way to work. Michael and Aisha, however, were still wrestling with the bitterness of the previous evening's events. Aisha sat at the small round table in the room, sipping her coffee while scrolling through her phone. The warmth of the drink did little to ease the cold knot of frustration in her chest. Michael, on the bed behind her, was silent, staring out of the window. His body language, stiff and tense, reflected the weight of what had happened. "How are you feeling?" Aisha asked without turning around. Michael sighed. I don't know. Angry, I guess. I can't stop thinking about that woman. She didn't even bother trying to hide it, did she?" Aisha shook her head, her jaw tightening. "Number." "She didn't." She put down her phone and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. "You know, we can't let this go." Michael turned to her, his brow furrowed. "I know, but what can we do? File a complaint? Write a bad review? Is it really going to change anything?" Aisha met his gaze. "Maybe not, but we can't keep pretending this stuff doesn't affect us. If we don't speak up, it's like we're telling them, it's okay to treat us this way." Michael nodded slowly, but he still felt the helplessness gnawing at him. "It's exhausting, though, fighting this battle every time." Aisha rose from her seat, walking over to the window to join him. They stood together in silence, watching the town below. In the distance, they could see the bed and breakfast that had turned them away. The pretty facade seemed almost mocking now, its charm hiding the ugly truth beneath. "I want to go back," Aisha said suddenly. Michael blinked in surprise. "Back where?" "To that bed and breakfast. I want to talk to her again." Michael stared at her, incredulous. "Are you serious? Why would we put ourselves through that again?" Aisha's eyes were hard with resolve. "Because we need to show her who we really are. We need to confront her, not with anger, but with dignity. She needs to see us as human beings, not just skin color." Michael hesitated, unsure if he wanted to subject himself to that kind of confrontation. But he knew Aisha, knew the fire that burned inside her when she felt wronged. And he knew she was right. They couldn't just walk away. "Okay," he said finally, "but we do it together." Later that morning, they walked through the town square, trying to shake off the nerves that had settled in their stomachs. As they passed the local diner, they could feel eyes on them, subtle glances from the patrons sitting by the windows, whispered conversations exchanged behind cupped hands. Michael had felt it before. In towns like this, where everyone knew everyone, strangers, especially black strangers, stood out. He could almost hear the thoughts behind those looks. Who are they? Why are they here? Aisha noticed it too, but her focus remained sharp. "Let them stare," she muttered under her breath, gripping Michael's hand tighter. They continued walking, their pace steady as they approached the bed and breakfast. When they arrived, the same gravel driveway crunched beneath their feet. The front porch looked just as pristine as it had the day before, but now, instead of feeling welcome, the place felt cold and uninviting. Michael took a deep breath before knocking on the door again. This time, they didn't have to wait as long. The woman, Judy, her name tag read, opened the door, and her eyes widened slightly when she saw them. "You again," she said, her tone flat but with a hint of annoyance. "Yes," Aisha replied, her voice calm but firm. "We'd like to speak with you." Judy crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "I already told you. We don't have any rooms." Aisha took a step forward, her eyes locking onto Judy's. "We're not here to stay anymore. We're here to talk." Judy shifted uncomfortably, glancing behind her as though hoping someone else would intervene, but no one came. "There's nothing to talk about," Judy said quickly, trying to close the door. "I told you. Why did you turn us away yesterday?" Michael interrupted, his voice steady but sharp. "We had a confirmed reservation. You didn't even check. You just told us to leave." Judy's expression hardened. "Like I said, we were full." Aisha shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "That's not true, and you know it." For a brief moment, the mask slipped. Judy's eyes flashed with something, guilt perhaps, or fear of being caught. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same stony expression. "We don't owe you an explanation," Judy said coldly, reaching for the door again. Aisha quickly stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "No, you don't. But I think deep down, you know why you did what you did. And so do we." Michael could see Judy's discomfort growing, but she refused to back down. Her face reddened slightly as she fumbled for words. "You can't just come here and accuse me of things like that. I don't have to explain myself to you." Aisha's voice softened, but her words carried the weight of all the pain, frustration, and injustice she had felt. "We don't need an explanation. We know why you closed that door on us. It's happened to us before, and it will probably happen again. But what you need to understand is that we're not just some nameless, faceless people you can dismiss. We're human beings, just like you. We have lives, families, dreams." Judy stared at Aisha, her mouth slightly open, as if unsure of how to respond. Michael watched, amazed at the grace and strength Aisha carried, even in the face of such blatant disrespect. "You may think that because we're black, we don't belong in a place like this," Aisha continued, her voice unwavering. "But that's where you're wrong. We belong wherever we choose to be. And just because you didn't want to see us, doesn't mean we'll disappear." Judy swallowed hard, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. For a moment, the silence was thick, filled with all the unspoken truths that hung between them. Then, without another word, she shut the door. This time, it felt different. Michael turned to Aisha, who exhaled slowly, the tension in her body starting to release. "That was brave," he said softly. Aisha nodded. "It needed to be said. Maybe it won't change her. But maybe, just maybe, it will make her think twice the next time." As they walked away, Michael could feel the eyes of the town on them again. But this time, he didn't care. They had done what they came to do. And this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. As Michael and Aisha left the bed and breakfast behind, the weight of the confrontation pressed down on them. The air felt thick with the unspoken truth they had just laid bare. But it didn't bring the sense of closure they had hoped for. Instead, the pain of being turned away, of being reduced to nothing more than their skin color, hung heavy in their hearts. Back at the inn, they sat in silence, the tension between them palpable. Michael, usually the first to crack a joke or lighten the mood, stared at the wall, his jaw clenched. Aisha, lost in thought, paced slowly across the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I thought I would feel better after confronting her," Aisha finally said, her voice quiet but filled with frustration. "But I don't." Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. "I get it. I thought that standing up to her would make a difference too. But now it just feels like we've ripped open a wound that won't heal." Aisha stopped pacing and turned toward him, her face tight with emotion. "I hate this, Michael. I hate that we have to keep proving ourselves, that we can't just be. We didn't do anything wrong, and yet we're the ones left feeling hurt, humiliated." Michael nodded, his heart heavy with the same frustration. "It's not fair," he murmured. "It never has been." For a moment, they just sat there in the quiet, the sounds of the inn and the world outside distant and muffled, like they were trapped in a bubble of their own pain. Aisha's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Michael felt the sharp ache in his chest deepen. "It's exhausting," she whispered, finally letting a tear roll down her cheek. "I'm so tired of fighting this battle, over and over." Michael got up, walking over to her and wrapping his arms around her shoulders. He held her close, feeling her pain as if it were his own. "I know," he said softly, his voice catching in his throat. "I'm tired too." They stood there in each other's embrace for what felt like hours. letting the weight of their shared experience sink in. But as the minutes passed, a quiet strength began to build between them. It was the kind of strength forged in adversity, the kind that had carried their ancestors through generations of struggle, through slavery, segregation, and systemic racism. It was the strength of survival, even in the face of relentless rejection. Aisha pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. "We have to do something," she said firmly, her voice gaining momentum. "We can't let this be the end of it. There has to be a way to make people like her understand, to make them see us." Michael nodded, though he still felt the weight of hopelessness pressing on him. "But how? We already confronted her, and she didn't care. People like that, they don't change." Aisha's face hardened. "Maybe not, but we're not just doing this for her. We're doing it for us, for every black couple that's been turned away, for every person who's been made to feel less than." Her words stirred something in Michael. He remembered the countless stories they had heard from their friends, their families, stories of rejection at restaurants, shops, and even workplaces, all because of the color of their skin. He thought of the times he had stayed quiet, not wanting to cause a scene or draw attention to the racism they faced. But maybe silence wasn't the answer anymore. "You're right," he said finally. "We need to make a stand, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who's been through this." Aisha smiled, a small but determined smile. "Exactly. And I think I know how we can start." Later that afternoon, the couple walked into the town's community center, a modest building that housed various local events, meetings, and social gatherings. It was the heart of the town's small but tight-knit community, a place where people came together to share ideas, celebrate milestones, and address issues affecting their lives. Aisha had discovered that the center held weekly town hall meetings, and she was determined to make their voices heard. They had never been the type to stay quiet, and now was not the time to start. As they entered the building, they were met with curious glances from the few townspeople already gathered. A tall man with a kind face approached them, his expression a mix of politeness and curiosity. "Afternoon," he said, offering his hand. "I'm Dave, the town's community organizer. I don't believe I've seen you two around here before." Michael shook his hand, his voice steady. "I'm Michael, and this is my wife, Aisha. We're visiting for the weekend." Dave nodded, looking between them with genuine interest. "Well, welcome to our little town. Anything we can help you with?" Aisha stepped forward. "Actually, we were hoping to attend the town hall meeting today. We have something we'd like to discuss with the community." Dave's eyebrows lifted in mild surprise, but nodded nonetheless. "Of course, it's a pretty informal gathering, just a chance for folks to talk about issues in the town. You're more than welcome." As they took their seats in the small room, Michael felt a familiar nervousness settle in his stomach. He knew that standing up in front of a group of people, many of whom likely held the same prejudices as Judy, would be no easy task. But he also knew they couldn't back down now. They had come too far. As the meeting began, local residents discussed mundane topics, road repairs, school fundraisers, and plans for the town's upcoming fall festival. Aisha listened politely, but her mind was focused on what they were about to do. When the floor opened for new topics, Aisha stood up, her heart pounding, but her voice strong. "We'd like to talk about an experience we had here in town," she said, her voice carrying across the room. The murmuring quieted as all eyes turned toward her. "My husband and I booked a stay at a local bed and breakfast, but when we arrived, we were turned away." Aisha continued. "We were told there were no rooms available, but we know that wasn't the real reason." A hush fell over the room, the tension thickening as people began to realize what she was implying. "We were turned away because of the color of our skin," Michael added, standing beside Aisha. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of the injustice they had experienced. "We've faced this kind of treatment before, but we didn't expect it here, in this town." Dave's face grew serious, his brows furrowing in concern. He glanced around the room, gauging the reactions of the townspeople. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, while others wore expressions of disbelief or defensiveness. "That's not who we are," Dave said finally, his voice measured. "If that happened to you, then it's something we need to address. This town prides itself on being welcoming, on being a place where everyone belongs." Aisha nodded. "We appreciate that, but it's not just about what happened to us. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. We want to be part of the solution, to help create a community where people of all races feel safe and welcome. The room remained silent for a moment, the weight of their words sinking in. A few people whispered to one another, exchanging concerned glances. Others stared at Michael and Aisha, their faces unreadable. Finally, Dave spoke again, his tone thoughtful. Let's work on this together. We can't change the past, but we can make sure our future is better. This is our home, and it should be a place where everyone is treated with dignity. Michael and Aisha exchanged a glance, feeling a small but meaningful sense of hope. The pain of rejection still lingered, but this time, they weren't walking away defeated. They were planting seeds of change. The days following the town hall meeting felt like a turning point for Michael and Aisha, but the emotional weight of what they had shared with the community lingered heavily in their hearts. Speaking out in front of a room full of strangers had been both liberating and exhausting, especially knowing that some of the people they addressed likely harbored the same prejudices as the woman who had turned them away. Back at the inn, they spent much of their time reflecting on what had happened and what their next steps would be. Aisha was particularly restless, her mind constantly churning, trying to figure out how to turn the pain they felt into meaningful change. One evening, after another quiet dinner in their room, Aisha broke the silence. "We can't just leave this behind us when we go home. I don't want to walk away from this town and let things go back to the way they were." Michael looked up from the book he was pretending to read, though his thoughts had been drifting for a while. He understood Aisha's frustration. It mirrored his own. "What do you want to do?" he asked, setting the book aside. Aisha paced back and forth across the room, her arms crossed, her face tight with determination. "I've been thinking we should get more involved. We need to reach out to people here, find out how they really feel. Maybe organize something that brings people together, something that forces them to confront these issues head on." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You want to stay? You want to fight this here?" Aisha stopped pacing and turned to face him. "We can't just come here, make a statement, and then disappear. If we leave now, that town hall meeting will fade into the background of their lives. Like a bad memory, they'll eventually forget. But if we stay, if we do something real, maybe we can make a lasting impact." Michael took a deep breath, considering her words. They had jobs, lives, and responsibilities back in the city, but he couldn't deny the pull he felt to do something more, to be part of a solution that stretched beyond just venting their pain. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every Black person who had been rejected, marginalized, and made to feel unwelcome in spaces where they had every right to be. "I don't know if we can change an entire town," he said cautiously, though he admired Aisha's resolve. "But we can at least try." Aisha nodded, her eyes gleaming with purpose. "We don't need to change everyone. We just need to plant enough seeds, make enough noise, that people can't ignore us. And we can start with the community center." The next morning, Michael and Aisha went back to the community center. Dave, the town's community organizer, greeted them warmly, clearly surprised but pleased to see them again. "I wasn't sure if we'd see you two back here so soon," Dave said, shaking their hands. "But I'm glad you came. The conversation you started the other day has really stuck with some folks." Aisha smiled, though her mind was already focused on the next steps. "We want to do more than start a conversation, Dave. We want to help create a real dialogue in this town, something that can lead to lasting change." Dave looked intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" Aisha glanced at Michael, who nodded in support. Then she turned back to Dave. "We were thinking of organizing a town event, something that brings people together, not just to talk, but to experience each other's cultures, to understand the diversity that exists in this country, even in places like this." "A cultural festival," Michael added, his voice picking up momentum, "with food, music, art, something that highlights the different backgrounds and histories people come from. Maybe if people here are exposed to new experiences, they'll be more open to seeing others as equals, as human beings." Dave's face lit up as he began to see the vision they were painting. "That's a fantastic idea. It could really bring people together, especially in a town like ours, where things tend to stay the same." Aisha could sense the underlying truth in his words. "We're not saying it will be easy, but if we can get people talking, sharing, even challenging their own perspectives. It'll be worth it. Dave nodded thoughtfully. We'll need to get the town council involved for something like this. They're the ones who'll need to sign off on an event that big. But I think we can make it happen. For the next few days, Aisha and Michael threw themselves into planning. They met with Dave regularly, discussing ideas for the festival and outlining potential activities. They drafted letters to the town council, hoping to persuade them to support the event, and spent hours reaching out to local businesses and artisans, trying to gather interest and participation. The work was exhausting, but it felt purposeful. Every meeting, every conversation was a step towards something bigger than themselves, something that might just begin to chip away at the walls of ignorance that had built up in this small town over generations. One afternoon, while Michael and Aisha were discussing logistics over coffee at a local cafe, they noticed Judy, the woman from the bed and breakfast, enter the cafe. Michael's heart tightened, and he instinctively tensed, expecting an awkward or hostile encounter. Judy saw them immediately, her face registering surprise. For a brief moment, her expression softened, as if she was considering whether to approach. She hesitated at the counter, shifting uncomfortably. Then, as if she had made a decision, she walked toward their table. Michael exchanged a glance with Aisha, who nodded ever so slightly, signaling that she was ready for whatever was about to happen. Judy stood in front of them, her posture rigid, her face a mixture of unease and something else. Was it guilt? Or perhaps it was the stirrings of reflection. Judy began, stumbling over her words. I've been thinking about what happened the other day, about what you said at the town hall. Aisha set her coffee down, her eyes narrowing slightly. And? Judy took a deep breath. Look, I didn't treat you right. I know that. I've been thinking about it a lot, actually. And I guess I just didn't realize how much hurt I was causing. Not just to you, but maybe to other people too. Michael was stunned. He hadn't expected any sort of apology from her, let alone something that seemed sincere. He glanced at Aisha, who was studying Judy carefully. I'm not saying I understand everything, Judy continued, her voice quieter now. But I want to learn. I want to do better. Aisha's expression softened slightly, though she still kept her guard up. That's a start, she said, her voice measured. But words aren't enough, Judy. If you really want to change, you have to be willing to do the work, to confront the parts of yourself that are uncomfortable. Judy nodded, her face somber. I know. That's why I'm here. I heard you're planning that cultural festival. I'd like to help, if you'll let me. Michael and Aisha exchanged a look of surprise. This wasn't what they had expected at all. Aisha tilted her head, considering Judy for a moment before speaking. If you're serious about wanting to help, we could use all the hands we can get. But we need to know you're committed. I am, Judy said quickly. I want to be part of something better. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken emotions. Then finally, Aisha nodded. All right, let's see what you can do. As the weeks went on, the town slowly began to buzz with excitement about the upcoming festival. Flyers appeared in store windows, word spread through local radio and newspapers, and people from all walks of life, black, white, young, and old, began to express interest in participating. For the first time in a long while, Michael and Aisha felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps the town wasn't as resistant to change as it had seemed. Perhaps, rising from the ashes of rejection, there could be something new, something better. The weeks leading up to the cultural festival passed in a blur of preparation, anticipation, and uncertainty. The entire town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would come of the event Michael and Aisha had sparked. For Michael and Aisha, it wasn't just about organizing a festival. It was about redemption, both for themselves and, in some ways, for the town. On the day of the festival, the weather was perfect. The air was warm with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of freshly blooming flowers through the town square. Brightly colored tents had been set up in a semicircle around the square, with tables offering food from different cultures, art displays, and musical performances. Aisha stood at the edge of the square, watching as people began to trickle in. She could hardly believe what they had accomplished in such a short time. The festival had started as just an idea, a flicker of hope during one of their most painful moments, and now it was real, a vibrant celebration of diversity and unity in a town that had once made them feel unwelcome. Michael joined her, carrying a clipboard and wearing an expression that was half pride, half nervous energy. "You ready for this?" he asked, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Aisha exhaled slowly. "As ready as I'll ever be." They walked through the square together, checking on the vendors and greeting people as they arrived. The crowd was growing steadily, and there was a mix of faces, some familiar from the town, others from nearby communities who had heard about the event. The atmosphere was lively, with the sound of drums and guitars from a local band filling the air, mingling with the laughter of children and the hum of conversation. But as they moved through the crowd, Aisha noticed something. Judy, the woman from the bed and breakfast, was there, standing by a table where volunteers were handing out programs for the event. She was helping to greet guests, her demeanor calm but focused. Aisha felt a strange sensation in her chest as she watched Judy work. Part of her still held on to the bitterness of their first encounter, the sting of rejection, the reminder of how deep-rooted prejudice could be. But another part of her, the part that wanted to believe in growth and change, felt something else. Hope. "You see her?" Michael asked quietly, following Aisha's gaze. "Judy's really trying, isn't she?" Aisha nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, I wasn't sure she'd stick with it, but maybe she is." Michael placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "People can surprise you. She might never fully understand what we go through, but she's making an effort. That counts for something." Aisha sighed. "It does. I just don't want to be too quick to forgive. It's not that easy." Michael smiled gently. "No one said you had to forgive her today, but letting people grow, that's part of this too." Aisha knew he was right, though it was hard to let go of the anger she had carried for so long. She had spent years building walls to protect herself from the pain of being treated as less than, of being dismissed, or worse, made invisible because of her skin color. But this festival, this moment, they were about more than holding on to anger. They were about creating space for understanding and healing, even if it came slowly. As the day progressed, the festival took on a life of its own. Food stalls featuring dishes from around the world lined the square: spicy Caribbean jerk chicken, savory Indian curries, smoky Southern barbecue, and fragrant Ethiopian stews. People moved from table to table, savoring flavors they had never tried before, engaging in conversations they might never have had in their everyday lives. At one corner of the square, an artist painted a mural representing unity and diversity. The mural, which had been blank at the start of the day, was now coming to life with vivid colors and images: a black mother holding her child, an elderly white farmer beside a field, a Latina girl with a book in her hand. The faces of the community were woven together in a way that felt real and powerful, a visual representation of what Michael and Aisha had hoped to achieve. At the center of the festival, a stage had been set up for performances. Throughout the day, local musicians and dancers took turns showcasing their talents, from African drumming to Irish folk songs to hip-hop dance crews. The crowd grew as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the square. When it was time for the speeches, Aisha felt a wave of nervous energy rush through her. She had spoken at the town hall weeks ago, but this felt different. This time, the entire town was watching, and many people had come specifically because of her and Michael's efforts. She didn't want to disappoint them. More than that, she didn't want to lose this fragile sense of momentum they had created. Michael squeezed her hand as they stood by the stage. "You've got this," he whispered. "Just speak from the heart." Aisha nodded, her pulse steadying as she stepped onto the stage. The crowd quieted, all eyes on her. She scanned the faces, seeing a mixture of curiosity, warmth, and even a few skeptical expressions. Judy stood toward the back, her face unreadable. "Thank you all for being here today," Aisha began, her voice strong. "When my husband and I first arrived in this town, we didn't know what to expect. We had come here for a weekend getaway, hoping to enjoy some time away from the city, but what we encountered was something much different than we had planned." She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. "We were turned away from a local business, one we had made a reservation with. We were told that there were no rooms available, but we knew the truth. We were turned away because of the color of our skin." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Aisha kept going, her gaze steady. That moment was painful for us, but it wasn't the first time something like that had happened, and it likely won't be the last. But instead of leaving and allowing the pain to follow us home, we made a choice. We chose to stay and fight for something better, not just for ourselves, but for this community, for all of us. She could see a shift in the crowd now, people leaning in, listening more intently. We organized this festival not because we wanted to bring attention to our own experience, but because we believe in the power of connection. We believe in the power of conversation, of sharing stories, of seeing each other as human beings first and foremost. That's what today is about, building bridges, not walls. And we hope this is just the beginning. There was a brief pause as Aisha's words hung in the air. Then slowly the crowd began to clap. The applause grew louder, more enthusiastic, until the square was filled with the sound of people coming together in support of what she had said. Aisha smiled, her heart swelling with both relief and pride. As she stepped down from the stage, Michael wrapped his arms around her. "You did it," he whispered, his voice filled with admiration. "You really did it." But before Aisha could respond, she noticed Judy approaching them. The woman's face was flushed, and she seemed nervous. But there was a determination in her step that Aisha hadn't seen before. "I just wanted to say," Judy began, her voice wavering slightly. "I heard what you said up there, and I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly. I've been thinking a lot about what I did, and I realize how wrong it was. I didn't see you for who you are, and that was my failure." Aisha felt a mix of emotions, surprise, anger, and a hint of compassion. Judy had been the face of their rejection, the person who had made them feel so small. But now, standing before them, she seemed vulnerable, almost pleading for forgiveness. "I can't take back what I did," Judy continued, her voice steadying. "But I want to do better. I want to be part of something that heals instead of divides." Aisha studied her for a moment, considering her words. Finally, she nodded, offering a small but genuine smile. "It's going to take time, Judy, but if you're willing to do the work, we're willing to move forward." Judy's eyes brightened with relief. "Thank you. I really appreciate that." As Judy walked away, Aisha turned to Michael, who was watching her with a proud smile. "You really meant that?" he asked. Aisha nodded, exhaling slowly. "Yeah, I did. We're not here to carry the weight of other people's hatred. We're here to rise above it." Michael smiled, wrapping his arm around her as they looked out over the festival, where people of different races, backgrounds, and walks of life were coming together. The music played, the sun dipped below the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, Aisha felt a sense of peace. They had come back to this town after being rejected, but now they were leaving it with dignity, and maybe, just maybe, they were leaving it better than they had found it. As the festival wound down and the last of the guests began to disperse, Michael and Aisha stood together in the town square, watching the sun set behind the old brick buildings. The warmth of the day was giving way to a cool evening breeze, and with it came a sense of quiet accomplishment. They had done it. The festival had been more than just a gathering. It had been a celebration of resilience, a testament to their belief that change was possible, even in places where it seemed unlikely. Michael squeezed Aisha's hand. "Look at this," he said softly, gesturing toward the square, where people from different walks of life were still chatting, laughing, and packing up booths. "This is what we wanted." Aisha smiled, though there was a certain heaviness in her expression. "Yeah, but it's only the beginning." She knew deep down that the festival was just one step in a long journey. Change didn't happen overnight, and the deep-seated issues that had brought them to this moment wouldn't disappear with one event. There was still work to be done, not just in this town but everywhere. But for the first time, it felt like they were moving in the right direction. They were about to head back to their room when Dave, the town's community organizer, approached them, his face alight with excitement. "You too," he called out, waving as he made his way over. "You did something amazing today. People are already talking about making this an annual event." Aisha's eyes widened. "Really? An annual event?" Dave nodded. "Absolutely. The town council loved it, and I've heard from so many people who want to get involved next year. What you did today, it's changing the way people think. It's opening eyes." Michael grinned. That's incredible. We honestly didn't expect it to take off like this. Dave chuckled. Well, sometimes all it takes is a spark. And you two, he pointed between them. You lit a fire. Aisha laughed softly, but inside she felt a mix of pride and apprehension. She was proud of what they had accomplished, but she also knew that true change went deeper than festivals and public events. It required confronting difficult truths and reshaping the way people understood race, privilege, and power. After Dave left, Michael turned to her. You okay? Aisha nodded, though she was lost in thought. Yeah, I just keep thinking about where we go from here. It feels good, but it's also overwhelming. We've started something, but how do we keep it going? Michael shrugged, smiling gently. One step at a time, I guess. We're not alone in this. Look around. There are people who want to help, who want to see things change. Aisha nodded, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what they had accomplished. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe there would still be challenges ahead. But they had started something real, something meaningful. The next morning, as they packed their bags to head back to the city, the quiet of their room felt bittersweet. It was strange leaving a town that had once made them feel so unwelcome, now with the knowledge that they had left a mark on it. I feel like we're leaving unfinished business, Aisha said, folding the last of her clothes into her suitcase. Michael looked at her, sensing the uncertainty in her voice. What do you mean? I mean, we came here, made a difference for a weekend, and now we're going back to our lives. What happens after we leave? What if everything just goes back to the way it was? Michael sat on the edge of the bed, thinking for a moment. Maybe it will for some people, he admitted. But I don't think that's the case for everyone. We saw something change here. People are talking. The festival isn't going to fix everything, but it opened a door, and I think it'll stay open. Aisha sighed, sitting beside him. I just don't want this to be another place we leave behind, you know? Another moment of resistance that fades away. Michael turned to her, his voice soft but sure. We're not leaving it behind, Aisha. We're taking it with us. Everything we've done here, everything we've learned, it's part of who we are now. And wherever we go, we carry that with us. Aisha looked at him, her eyes searching his for reassurance. So what do we do next? Michael smiled. We keep going. We keep pushing, keep organizing, keep fighting. This isn't just about one town, one moment. This is about a lifetime of standing up for what's right, and we don't have to do it alone. Aisha nodded slowly, feeling the truth in his words. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. You always know what to say. Michael chuckled softly. Not always, but I know we're not done yet. On the drive back to the city, the landscape rolled past in a blur. Fields, forests, and small towns, each one a reminder of the work that lay ahead. Aisha stared out the window, her mind turning over everything that had happened in the past few weeks. The pain of rejection, the slow build toward resistance, the confrontation with Judy, and finally, the festival that had brought the town together, however briefly. She thought about her own journey, the years she had spent learning how to navigate a world that constantly reminded her she was other, the walls she had built to protect herself from the sting of racism, the quiet battles she had fought, often without recognition or support. And now, for the first time, she felt like those battles were leading somewhere, like they were building towards something greater than just survival. As they approached the city, Michael glanced over at her. You know, he said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, we could come back. Maybe not right away, but we don't have to say goodbye to that town forever. Aisha turned to him, raising an eyebrow. Come back? You really think we'd be welcomed after all this? Michael shrugged. Who knows? But I think we've already changed how some people see us. And besides, it's not just about being welcomed. It's about making space where there wasn't any before. We don't have to wait for people to accept us. We can show up, do the work, and let them deal with their discomfort. Aisha smiled at his words. You're right. We've never been the type to wait for permission, have we? Michael grinned. Not in this lifetime. They drove in comfortable silence for a while longer, the city skyline finally coming into view. But even as they returned to the familiar bustle of their lives, Aisha couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within her. The pain of rejection had fueled their resistance, but now there was something more. There was hope. Hope that, despite everything, people could change, that communities could come together, even in the most unlikely of places. As they pulled into their driveway, Michael turned off the engine and sat for a moment, his hand resting on the steering wheel. "What do you think comes next?" he asked, though it was clear he already had some ideas of his own. Aisha smiled, a quiet determination settling in her chest. "We keep fighting. We find new ways to make change, to build bridges, to confront the things people don't want to talk about. We don't stop." Michael nodded, reaching over to take her hand. "Together?" Aisha squeezed his hand gently. "Always." They stepped out of the car, carrying with them the lessons of the past few weeks, the pain, the growth, the resilience, and the hope for something better. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were in it for the long haul, and they were ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in a long while, Aisha felt lighter, as though the weight of rejection had given way to something else. Not acceptance, not yet, but a sense of purpose, a belief that the future could be shaped by their hands, that they had the power to rise above the past and build something new. And as they walked into their home, Aisha knew that their journey was far from over.